All right, well, let's get started. Um, we should have a couple people maybe joining us on Zoom in a little bit, but we'll see what happens. My name is Patrick Urbanski. I am a horticulture production student actually at Oregon State, and I work for the OSU Ornamental Breeding Program, where we breed a bunch of woody stem shrubs and landscape plants that you later will buy in the garden center. So I'm really happy that you're able to join us all today. No, come on in, you're just fine.
Everybody sits here.
I'll hand you a handout too. Yeah. And welcome to Shonnard's for our open house weekend. I'm really glad that you guys are all here. We should have some treats and stuff inside. And as a thank you for coming to our class today too, we have a 10% off coupon that you can use just today after class in the store. And it's 10% off your entire purchase. There's no exclusions or anything like that. So feel free and use that as well. But today we're going to be talking about collector houseplant care. So in recent years, a lot of houseplants have become popular again. A lot of houseplants that we saw popular in the 70s has become popular, like monsteras and spider plants and stuff like that. But with the pandemic and with social media, a lot of stuff has changed. They are finding new cultivars and varieties of houseplants, or some that have been hidden in cultivation that have become more desirable. Which has caused the prices to go up on a lot of different houseplants, on collector houseplants and regular houseplants. I also want to say that, collector houseplants are not necessarily botanically rare. They're not necessarily like endangered, or, they're just not super common in cultivation or where they're grown, which caused them to be a little bit more expensive because they're just harder to find and they can't grow them as quickly for some reason. A lot of variegated houseplants, so the ones with kind of the white and the yellow patterns on them, the variegation won't carry over in seeds, and so they can't grow them by seed. They have to be grown by cuttings, and sometimes by tissue culture, but not every plant with variegation will also carry over into tissue culture, which is really how a lot of our plants today are mass produced and then grown out. And tissue culture is really complicated, but it kind of involves taking a little piece of the plant, putting it in a sterile, nutrient-based growing media, and they enclose it and they keep it in there for a couple months, and they multiply it into a bunch of into thousands of tiny little plants that they later will take out and then plant out and then ship off. So that's kind of the easiest way for plants to be grown. But a lot of variegation and stuff like that won't carry over in tissue culture, just because the tissues that they take from don't have the variegation in it, if that makes sense. I also forgot to mention, feel free and raise your hand and ask questions during class today as well. A lot of our collector's plants, like I said, are variegated, and variegation is a genetic mutation within the plant. And sometimes, and it also is a lack of chlorophyll. So that's why there's no green in it. It's missing chlorophyll. So that part of the plant won't photosynthesize. Let's see here. And variegation is really interesting because actually it can be found naturally. It can be a natural genetic mutation, but also there are ways for people to induce variegation with radiation, actually. And so there's a couple other ways, but basically they'll blast the plant, the seed, with a form of radiation, and it'll cause a mutation in the plant. That radiation isn't carried over or anything. So, I mean, if you're buying a plant that's artificially variegated, it's not going to have radiation coming off of it or anything. It's just a way for people to put variegation into something, and so they can sell it and hopefully make more money is really the goal of that. A lot of our plants back here are just genetic mutations. I don't think that we have any that are artificially variegated. If you guys know what a philodendron Birkin is, they're a pretty common grocery store plant. It's a variegated version of the green Congo. That is artificially variegated. It's got the stripes on it instead, and it's a lot more uniform than, say, like the Thai constellation over there. Social media. I'm going to switch actually this slide here so you guys can take a look. We're talking a little bit about social media has actually really influenced. I wonder if I can get this out of here. Okay, I'll get that out for you guys. So social media has really heavily influenced the demand for houseplant prices, the demand for houseplants in general. It's kind of created this almost a false reality of people having, a bunch of plants in their home that all look beautiful all the time. And it's, this is a really popular Instagram account over here called Houseplant Club. that was a recent picture, and they have 958,000 followers on Instagram. So there's a lot of things that are going into, driving the prices higher for these houseplants, and causing demand for houseplants. And so as nurseries try and keep up with it, prices are beginning to go down, which is good, but there are still some plants that you'll find that are quite expensive. And, there's nothing wrong with buying an expensive plant. I've done it plenty of times. And then you find out, a year later, it's half the price or something, and you're like, well, it's here we are. So, but if you like it, it's always fun to have. So that's kind of what I, think about towards that. And here at Shonnard, you can see we've got quite a big selection of collector's plants in recent months. So I'm really excited for that. We found some new growers, and our growers have been adding new plants to their availabilities. So we try and keep stuff in stock. If you see something that we don't have right away or right now, you can always put in a wish list request through our computer if you're a part of our rewards program, and we'll look for that. And there's no guarantee that we'll find it for you, but if we do, we'll bring it in and we'll call you and you can come and pick it up. So that's a good way for that as well. Let's see here. So for selection, there's quite a bunch of different options for you to choose from. Lots of easy care stuff, and there's some harder stuff as well. I've kind of separated some into categories here. Some really easy care varieties and cultivars include philodendron, pothos, syngoniums, ZZ plants, and aglaonema, and then Hoya. I all would consider really easy to care for, really forgiving plants. They grow really fast, and so they're really fun to have as well. Some intermediate care stuff, and I'll explain why I kind of have these separated into categories in a second, include like variegated monsteras. A lot of alocasia are a little bit harder to care for, ficus, anthurium, and ferns. I put monstera on there, it's known to be pretty easy to care for as a non-variegated plant. But for variegated monstera, they like a little bit higher light to have good variegation. And they also like a little bit more humidity to keep that variegation. The variegation will brown really easily if it's really dry. So that's why I kind of have it in a little bit more of an intermediate care, even though monstera is generally a pretty easy plant to take care of. So yeah, also, anthurium and ferns, they like to stay a little bit more moist, so watering is going to be a little bit more demanding, which is kind of why I have that in intermediate care as well. And if anyone's had a ficus, I'm sure they're the same. As collector plants or not, they're a little bit more temperamental than, a lot of other plants. Let's talk about watering for a lot of these plants in here. I can't, unfortunately, give you all a schedule of when to water each plant. Everybody's house is different. The temperatures in your houses are different. The lighting in your houses is different. The drafts in your house are different. So plants are going to dry out or stay wet different in everybody's environment. What I can do is kind of give you some tips on how to kind of judge if your plant needs water or if it doesn't need water. So a lot of plants like monstera, philodendron, and pothos, they do like to get close to drying out before you water them again or completely dry. They're pretty good about, being okay a couple days dry and, giving it a water. If they stay wet for too long or the soil is too compacted, you can get some root rot. Generally, they like to grow up trees in the forest, so they're kind of just attached to the bark and the moss. And so it's not, pushed together in, a nice tight like ball of peat. And so that without the airflow or chunky soil media, it can cause a little bit of root rot. So I always try and make sure, that they are close to drying out before you would water it again. ZZ plants, aglaonema, Hoyas, and ficus like to dry out like completely. You do not want to really water any of those plants if they're already wet. A good way to kind of tell if a plant is dry still is, if you pick it up, it's going to be really light if it's dry. If it's really heavy and you can kind of see at the top it's moist, you can always check with your finger. It's not my favorite because it could be wet in the middle and you don't know. So the weight test is kind of my favorite to tell if it's really wet or not. But like I said, ficus will drop leaves if they stay wet for too long. Hoya, I kind of treat like a succulent almost, where it can kind of feel the leaves. And if it feels leathery or wrinkly, then it needs water. But if it's nice and tight and smooth, it's probably well watered and you don't need to water it for at least another week or so. It's kind of the same thing with ZZ plants as well. You can we've got one in here, but if it's got nice thick waxy leaves, there's a smaller one on that table too over there, the black one in the corner. If it's got nice thick leaves and it's really smooth, you can kind of tell that it doesn't need water right away. Those generally, watering is about every 2 weeks in the summer and maybe even longer in the winter time. So that's kind of what we think about that. There's almost no plants that should be watered every day is also what I would like to kind of let you guys know. I want to talk about fertilizer as well. So fertilizer is kind of a contested topic for a lot of houseplant growers. I used to not use it when I was first starting out, because a lot of people don't think that you need it because, you know, plants grow in the wild, they grow in dirt in the wild. Why would you need to add anything to that to make them grow well? So fertilizer, when plants are confined into a section like a pot, they're not able to reach out in the roots and find more nutrients in the soil that they're planted in. So they're stuck in one spot. So once they kind of use all the nutrients that's in that pot, they're out. And so they're gonna slow their growth. Their growth is gonna be smaller. It's not gonna be as strong. It's not gonna look as nice. And so fertilizer really, really helps your plants reach their full potential. If you like big leaves, if you like really healthy green plants, fertilizer is really important, I would say, in a lot of growth. Like I said, I used to not use it. I would just repot my plants every year and it would give them some nutrients. But as soon as I started using fertilizer, I noticed that the growth was a lot faster. It was a lot stronger and you get more variation. It was a lot nicer. So if a plant is, you know, in a good environment, it's going to kind of reward you with that as well. In Oregon, we got to kind of adjust a little bit because it is so dark here in the wintertime. A lot of these plants are from tropical rainforest near the equator where there's the sun all year round. It's nice and warm and bright. We get kind of dark and dreary here in Oregon. So they do naturally slow their growth for us in the winter time, just because there's not as much light. So there's not as much photosynthesis going on. So they're just not going to be growing as much. So fertilizer usage should be reduced or kind of cut out between the months of March and September. If your plant is still growing strong and it's growing lots of leaves, then I would say go ahead and keep fertilizing it. It's not going to hurt the plant, but you can over fertilize as well. So that can cause leaf burn, root burn, just kind of unsightly stuff. So make sure that you follow the directions on the fertilizer that you have, and that you can kind of reduce it maybe in the wintertime if you're not seeing as much growth or if you don't have as much light in your house in the wintertime. We have quite a variety of fertilizers for sale here at Shonnard's. We got a couple liquid ones, which are great. You would just usually put those in every time that you water. And then we also have a lot of slow release ones, which is my favorite because you would put that in the soil and it lasts you, you know, anywhere from 2 weeks to like a couple months. And I'm lazy and I forget. So it's really easy to put slow release in, you know, at the beginning of the growing season and then do it one more time halfway through and it'll be set for the year. You can also do a combination of both if your plants are growing really fast. I do that sometimes and I've noticed a lot of really strong growth. You just have to be careful, like I said, of fertilizer burn. If you're using an organic fertilizer burn is not really as much of a concern. The burn comes from excess salts from a lot of our manufactured fertilizers. So if you're using a manufactured fertilizer, it's good to flush your soil out every couple months. Just kind of give it a really big water till water is, you know, pouring out the bottom, just to kind of wash away some of that excess salt, and that'll prevent any over fertilizing or fertilizer burn or salt burn or something like that. So yeah, fertilizer, I was on the fence, but I would say it's definitely helpful, especially for us in Oregon where we can kind of maximize our growing season. And if you like I said, big leaves, nice mature looking plants, fertilizer is definitely very helpful in getting you to that point. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about watering and stuff like that. And like I said too, watering is definitely going to be a lot less in the wintertime than it is in the summertime. Yeah.
I have a question about fertilizer. They make all different kinds, like succulents and violets. And
yes.
all this sort of, is that
yes.
important?
So yeah, so what that means basically, the question for the people that are going to watch this later on Zoom, the question was about different kinds of fertilizer and if that's important or not. Different kinds of fertilizer are specifically formulated for certain plants. So the 3 numbers on fertilizer, I don't know if you guys have known this or not, but I always remember it. The first number is for up, and then the second number is for down, and the second number is for all around. So up meaning leafy growth, green, nice leafy growth, which is going to be a lot of your houseplants. It's a higher nitrogen fertilizer. So that is important for a lot of plants that you're not really trying to get flowers for. Second one is down, meaning root growth. So if you need a plant to be established better, or you're going to want stronger root growth, that's what the second number is for. And the last number is kind of for blooming and all around health. So the specific formulations of fertilizer, like the African violet fertilizer, is going to have a higher bottom number because you grow African violets for the flowers, not for the leaves, if that makes sense. So there will be, you know, a houseplant fertilizer, or there'll be African violet fertilizer, and that is totally fine. But if you can go into a store and say, hey, this number, the first number is higher than the rest of the numbers, and I need it for green leafy growth, that is kind of what you're looking for, if that makes sense. There will be houseplant fertilizer and stuff like that as well, and that's perfectly fine for these. I even use an orchid fertilizer for a lot of my houseplants because it helps them get good roots and good leafy growth as well. And so it kind of just depends. If you go into a garden center or like here, we'll have some suggestions for you kind of laid out, and we can kind of explain that in depth for you. But like back there, we've got one that's called Osmocote. It's a slow release. It's indoor outdoor. Is what it's called, but it works great for a lot of our houseplants for a slow release fertilizer, if that makes sense. Alrighty, I think I'm going to move on to lighting for a lot of our collector houseplants. So this is kind of a diagram here. It's really hard to explain lighting to a lot of people, and I still don't always fully understand lighting. So hopefully this diagram helps to clear it up a little bit for you guys. But when we say bright light or full sun, we mean directly in front of a nice window, a big south or west window. South window gets sun pretty much all day because the sun goes up and it shines directly into the south the whole entire day. A west window will not get morning sun, but it'll get really, really intense, especially here in Oregon in the summertime. Really, really intense afternoon and evening sun. So that's great for our cactuses, for our ficus, and even a monstera can do fine in a south window as well. They grow really fast, but you might have to kind of ease it into it because, you know, a lot of them are grown in lower light than what they would normally experience in the wild. So you might have to kind of ease some plants into higher light. But at higher light, if they are in a good lit situation, they will grow very fast for you. Bright indirect light or medium light is this are kind of the same thing in my book when I explain that to people. Bright indirect is this monstera that's just out of, you know, the really bright direct sun. It's so that the area is really well lit, but it's not, you know, completely dark. It might get dappled sun, or it just might be really bright in that area. But a lot of plants for our rainforest plants are going to be perfectly happy in bright indirect light. Maybe some morning sun, and morning sun would be east window. So I would consider an east window to be bright indirect because it does get that direct morning sun, but the morning sun is not as intense as the evening sun is going to be. So it's not going to burn your plants like an evening sun would. Darker or low light would be considered back of the room, farthest away from the window, or, you know, a north window is low light, or, you know, it could be bright indirect as well, but north windows tend to be pretty dark, especially in the winter here. So that would be good for a lot of ferns, ZZ plants, aglaonema, stuff like that. Let's see. I got a couple of things here for highlight. Ficus, monstera, Hoya, alocasia, all like really highlight for good growth. Bright indirect light, monstera can handle bright indirect light, they just won't grow as quickly. Hoya, same thing. Alocasia, philodendron, both those ferns and anthuriums are really happy in that bright indirect light. Low light would include pothos, ZZ plants, aglaonemas, and ferns. They can tolerate pretty low light. They just won't grow as fast, but they will do fine. All my snake plants are in like the top dark corner of my room where no plants will grow, and they do perfectly fine. So that's a good, there are plants for every space in every house. They do, except for rooms with no windows. Don't put a plant in a room with no windows. They will not be happy in there. I had a friend one time, she has her laundry room and has no windows in there, but her living room is super bright. So she bought 2 of the same plants, and every week she would switch them. And so the ZZ plant, it was a ZZ plant. So, you know, it can take the lower light for, you know, a week, and then you switch it, and you can photosynthesize for a week and, you know, be happy, and then you switch them back. So if you have a plant, if you have a room with no windows, that is a solution for having a plant in there. It's just a little bit more work. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. Like I said, highlight plants and highlight would be considered south or western facing windows. Intermediate or bright light plants would be north window or east windows, or set back a little bit from a south or west window. Low light plants can be in north windows and tolerate darker spaces, but they would still need a source of light there. I want to talk about grow lights. I was also a grow light hater, but now I'm not, because, you know, I live in Oregon and you just kind of have to deal with it, unfortunately. So there's a couple different options for grow lights. you can actually get, like a stand. We've got an example right there, like a desktop stand of a grow light, and there's a bulb in it already. You would just plug it in and put the plant underneath it, and it will do great. That would be considered a highlight situation. So if you have a plant that you want to put in a room really dark, that's a highlight, a grow light would be a great solution to that problem. You can put other intermediate plants around it and lower light plants farther away from it. So it's the same thing. It's like a little mini sun. So the diagram would be the same, but this would be a grow light, if that makes sense. They can also be used to supplement light just like in the winter time. So I mean, if you have a really nice north window that's really bright all summer, but then it just gets dark and dreary here in the winter time, you could always put a grow light in just to kind of make the light a little bit better. If you have a light fixture, we sell just bulbs that you can actually screw into any fixture. So you can just replace the bulb, and when you have your lights on in the house, it works as a grow light as well. That's a really easy way and a really kind of smooth way. You don't really see another light fixture if you don't want one, but their plants are still getting the adequate light that they would need in the winter time. I will talk a little bit later about kind of humidity sections and stuff like that. I have a big glass curio cabinet thing with a lot of plants in it, and I've stuck kind of sticky grow lights up to the top of them. And that is a little mini greenhouse in my house, and I can put it in anywhere where there's no light because it's nice and grow lights. So something like that would work as well if you're getting really ambitious with that. So I think that's all I have to say about lighting. Really sucks being in the winter here. It's always dark, even for us, The plants don't like it either, so a little extra light in the winter can, especially now as we're getting kind of into it, will help a lot. I'm going to move on to temperature and humidity for a lot of our grow light stuff. For a lot of our houseplant stuff here. This is kind of applicable to a lot of different houseplants. Oh yeah, there's a picture of what my glass little cabinet is. You can't see them, but there are grow lights stuck up underneath them. So it kind of lights them up, and you can put it in a dark corner, which is great, and it adds another section. I have plants next to it that will get the light from that as well. So it's kind of a multi-purpose thing. It's not just for one plant. Temperature and humidity can be an interesting issue to talk about for a lot of people, because a lot of people will say, oh, just missed it to provide extra humidity, it's perfectly fine. There's a difference between temporary and meaningful humidity. Misting plants I like to refer that as temporary humidity. You spray it, the humidity goes up, and then it dries, and then that's it. There's nothing, it doesn't stick around. Meaningful humidity is a source of humidity in your house that is constant, or more than just half an hour, if that makes sense. So we come in, and if you have a plant that would require higher humidity, I like to say, put it in your bathroom or near your shower, your kitchen sink when you're doing dishes, up above it, you get that nice mist. That's a good way to add meaningful humidity. If you have lots of plants, humidifiers are really kind of the best way, in my opinion, to add humidity into your house. You can also do pebble trays, which is where you would get a clear plastic, or it doesn't really matter, anything that'll hold water that's shallow, and you would fill it with gravel, and then you can fill that with water. And the extra surface tension that the gravel provides helps the water evaporate faster. And so it adds a little bit more long-term humidity into the room, if that makes a little bit of sense. Does that kind of make sense to you? Okay, perfect. A lot of our collectors plants don't need extra humidity. A lot of our drier plants, like the ZZ plants, the Aglaonema, the Hoya, they could care less. They don't really need extra humidity. A lot of our alocasias, some philodendrons, some variegated plants especially do really appreciate the extra humidity. Like I said earlier, variegation is really sensitive. There's no chlorophyll in it, so it doesn't actually do anything for the plant. So if the plant is stressed out, it's just going to kill off the variegated tissue, or the variegated tissue is going to die, because it's not actually doing it. It's only aesthetics for us. The plant doesn't gain anything from having variegated tissue. So having that in an ideal environment is going to help you get more variegation and help it last a lot longer. You can even kind of see right here on this tie, it's starting to brown a little bit, and because this whole section is white, that's pretty common, unfortunately. That can very easily just be trimmed off. But in higher humidity situations where it's not being bumped all the time, is going to help the variegation last a lot longer. Humidity, and like I said, humidity is really important for that as well. And there's a lot of different ways to provide humidity. You could also do like a cloche. This is a picture of an open cloche. So someone made a little mini terrarium inside of a cloche, and normally there'd be a big glass structure sitting on top of it, and you would have to air it out every so often. But that is a good way to provide humidity. We've kind of got a big terrarium over there. Something like that for a smaller plant would work really well. And it's kind of a statement piece. They're great for centerpieces or big accents in your house, which is really fun. So that's also a really, really good way to provide humidity. Like I mentioned, misting is only temporary, and unfortunately too, because misting is actual water being sprayed onto the plants, it can cause fungus issues. So if the water stays on there for too long, especially in the wintertime here where it's dark and not drying out, it can cause the dispersal of fungus spores, which will then kind of infect your plant, and that can cause issues later on down the road. There are treatments for that, and we'll talk about that kind of in our pest section. But misting all the time and keeping it in wet soil is going to cause, fungus issues as well. So that's something to watch out for. Humidity is great, or humidifiers are great because it's just a cool fog. It's not actual water droplets being, like big water droplets being put onto the plant. Let's see here. Like I said, variegated plants, anthuriums, alocasias do appreciate the extra humidity. You'll see a lot of root growth, and if you've got more humidity for your monsteras and stuff, you'll see a lot of aerial roots coming out of the pot and kind of trying to find places to grab on. That's pretty normal. It's not meaning the plant's in danger. It means the plant's happy, and it's just kind of looking for something to cling on to. Yeah.
So if you have a home in the wintertime that typically needs a dehumidifier,
Mm-hmm.
do you have to be too concerned, or how would you know that they're lacking?
Yeah, so like I said, you can kind of look to know that they're lacking. You can look for brown spots, dying tips on the leaves. You can also get a humidistat. It'll like it's a thermometer and a humidistat. You can kind of see, put it in your plants. A good way to also provide humidity in your plants is to group them all together, because they release water at nighttime under their leaves, and so the humidity goes up at night always. And so if you have a dehumidifier in your home, you can always get a humidistat and just kind of test that and see where the percentage is. They're pretty happy, they can be happy 40%, somewhere in there. But if it's lower than that, or they have a hot, dry heating vent blowing on them, I'd be a little bit more concerned. But if they look fine, and if they don't have any brown tips or anything, or the variegation's not dying, I would say you're probably just fine. Okay. I did also just mention hot drafts, cool drafts. Ficus hate drafts. They will just die. They'll just drop all their leaves and die if they're in a draft. So you have to be careful about those. Like I said, it can cause brown tips. Same plants, alocasia, hate drafts. They hate the leaves being blown on. So I would buy like a heater or something like that. So you got to be careful about that in the wintertime. I have a vent in my room on the ceiling that blows directly down onto a lot of my plants, and they were starting to drop leaves and get angry at me. So I went to Home Depot and I bought a vent deflector. It's just a little piece of plastic that's magnetic, and it just magnets to the vent, and it just kind of directs the air across the room instead of directly down onto my plants. That's a great solution. It's really cheap. I use it, so it's really good. And that's a really good way to, especially in the wintertime and the summer, to watch out for AC and heat drafts. I'll talk about temperature too. Like I said, a lot of these plants, they are tropical. 60 degrees is kind of the lowest that they go, where you won't see signs of anger and sadness from them. And 85 degrees Fahrenheit for heat is kind of where they would stop growing after that. And they kind of go into water saving mode. So if you want the best growth, keep the temperatures ideally between 60 and 85. Can be hard sometimes when they're right up against a window in the wintertime. So you might have to pull it back a little bit in the wintertime. Even in the summertime, if the sun's really bright, they can get a little too hot in the window too. So just be considerate of that. Yeah.
Another question. So given the temperature range, are there any of these plants that would enjoy summering outside on a patio?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so a lot of our like monstera and some philodendrons would do great under a covered patio or under a tree or something like that. The variegated ones, be really careful, guys. I had a plant stolen off my porch a couple weeks ago. I'm really upset about it still, so be careful about that. But a lot of our variegated stuff, it does get a little dry here in the summertime. So if you can go out there and shower it with your hose every day, that would be helpful. And that, because it's outside, there's lots of airflow. It's not going to really cause fungus issues because it's hot and it's really windy outside in the summertime. And so spraying it with your hose isn't going to be the same as misting it constantly inside in a darker spot or something like that, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would just be alocasia. I would say some alocasia can do well outside. A lot of the mini ones and the really thin leaved alocasia elephant ears do not do well outside. So that I would keep inside. Plants do like to be stable. They like a stable environment. So if it's doing really, really well in your house, I would be a little wary of moving it outside. Just because there is going to be an adjustment period and it might stop growing for a little bit. But if it will do better outside in the summertime, then yeah, by all means, they'll do great in the summer. So yeah.
And do you need to harden them off before you think?
Yeah, usually, or you can wait. I mean, Mother's Day generally is a good time to start putting plants outside. It's usually after danger of frost. Look at the nighttime lows, and see how cold it's getting. But yeah, I would be careful about hardening them off, especially if it's hot outside too, because they can get burned pretty easily with the sensitive variegation and stuff like that. A lot of higher humidity stuff like anthuriums and some alocasia and ferns might not appreciate being outside just because it is so dry here in the summertime. But bigger plants that are more established would probably do well inside. So yeah. I don't think I've got anything else to talk about in this section. Oh yeah. Also cold drafts, I want to talk about, be careful near doors in the wintertime, because as you open your front door, and your ficus is right in your entryway and it just gets blasted with cold air, it's going to be unhappy. So be careful about putting a lot more sensitive plants near your doors in the wintertime as well. And if you do have a hot part of your house that's cold and you want to keep it warmer at night, we've got heat mats. They're usually used for starting seeds. But you can put that underneath the plants and it'll provide kind of a nicer, warmer root area and also kind of area above the plant. We've got one on that table right there that's kind of rolled up in that box. But those work really well for adding extra heat in an area too. So, all right, let's move on to repotting and other maintenance stuff. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, perfect. Let's see here. Okay, perfect. So this is my lovely coworker Angel. You'll probably see her around as if you guys come in here a lot, but a lot of our we do offer repotting services for a lot of houseplants here. So if you want to do it with us or you're afraid, we can definitely walk you through it, or we can just do it for you. We have a little fee based on the size of the pot, but I'm going to talk about how you can do it yourself as well. But we do offer that here in store, just so you guys know. If you want advice too about repotting a certain plant because you've got a unique situation, we'll definitely be able to talk to you about that as well. How we doing on time? Very good. Okay. So a lot of our collectors plants like philodendrons, ZZ plants, Hoyas, monsteras, pothos, ficus, like really well drained, chunky soil mixtures. What I mean by chunky is I always put in some orchid bark and some extra perlite in there. We sell that in small bags, and there's some on that table as well. We'll mix that, about 25% orchid bark, 25% perlite, and then 50% potting soil. Mix it together, and then use that to repot your plant. That keeps the soil mixture really well draining, really chunky, lots of good airflow. So that is, and it keeps the roots really healthy. It kind of makes them feel like they're growing on a tree with moss. So you're trying to mimic their natural environment as much as possible. So that's what that kind of does with that. A lot of our anthuriums and ferns like to stay a little bit more moist than, say, your monstera or your ficus would. And so for anthuriums, my preferred mixture is 50% perlite, 50% New Zealand sphagnum moss. New Zealand sphagnum moss is a really long fibered moss that grows in New Zealand, but we also have some here that grows in native. And they harvest it and they dry it and they dehydrate it, and then you would just put it in water and mix it up with the perlite and plant it in that. The roots do super great in that, and it adds a lot of good airflow in there, but while keeping them soil moist pretty much at all times. Ferns are great in normal potting soil. They don't really need a lot of special treatment, I would say. So that's what I gotta say about that. For some anthuriums, if you're planting them in sphagnum moss, adding some orchid bark would be helpful in larger sizes, because as you get larger, there's more space in the middle that can kind of get, stay wet a lot longer. So adding orchid bark to that mixture later on as they get bigger is helpful to keep the soil well draining and to keep the water drying out more in a uniform way than just from the outside in, if that makes sense. Repotting is best done, I would say, in the springtime. A lot of our plants in here in Oregon, due to the light requirements and the light outside, grow the most between March through September. Yeah, March to September. And so repotting, February, March, April is a great time to repot because they're just starting to grow new roots. They're just starting to grow new leaves. So if you put that thing in a bigger pot, it's going to be able to kind of grow into it throughout the season. If you repot, right now, if it's growing, you're fine. But if it stops growing, you can kind of get a layer of soil on the outside that just stays wet. And that will kind of cause some issues for you later with root rot, other fungus issues, fungus gnats. Which we'll also talk about later in pests, but everyone hates fungus gnats in their house. So, so that is, on that topic as well, I would only go about 1 to 2 inches bigger in diameter when you're repotting plants than what they're already in. So if you start with like a 4-inch plant, like this one right here, you would only want to go up into a 6-inch at maximum, which is this size. So only upsize, you have to go up through the size. It's kind of like as you're growing through and getting new shoes. You gotta upsize, carefully and not just big right away. That'll prevent a lot of other issues for you later on as well. Let's see here, what else? Yeah, like I said, repotting in spring is really important. If you have a special case where you buy a new plant and it's in gross soil, it smells bad, there's fungus gnats, it's not the soil that you like. Repotting right now isn't the worst thing, but you might just need to take out the plant, get rid of the old soil, give it new soil, and put it back in the same pot. If it's not outgrowing, if your soil gets old, that's something you're just refreshing the soil is fine. It doesn't always need to be upsized when you repot it, if that makes sense. If you pull it out, it doesn't have a whole lot of roots, then putting it back in the same pot is not a big deal. It's probably better for it than upsizing it. Like I said, we sell all the stuff that I mentioned, orchid bark, perlite. We do have our repotting services in here. Let's see here, what else? A good way to tell if your plant needs to be repotted is roots will be coming out the bottom of the pot. The roots, if you take it out of the pot, will be circling the pot. Some will kind of grow out of the top because they can grow aerial roots and they'll just kind of go everywhere. That's a good way to tell it needs to be repotted. If you are watering and the soil doesn't seem to be holding water anymore, the water just runs right through and it's dry the next day, that soil has probably gone old and gotten hydrophobic. So that's another good indicator that it would be time to refresh the soil or upsize if needed. Let's see here, what else have we got? Watching for pests, trimming dead and drying leaves, dusting and cleaning leaves, training a lot of our climbing plants like Monstera or pothos. If you want your pothos to be trained up a pole, they can trail too. They're happy either way. Are all good things to consider with maintenance when you're buying a new plant from us. We sell poles that you can kind of stake your plants to if you have a climber. This Monstera likes to climb up trees normally, so getting a good stake for it is going to help it get really big leaves later on. So just stuff like that. If you are unsure too, if your plant's a climber, crawler, trailer, feel free to ask us. We can definitely help. I can kind of go over some stuff like that too. A lot of the Monsteras tend to be climbers. Ficus, you might need to stake it, but they are just trees, so they kind of just grow by themselves up a tree as a tree shape. Hoyas can be trellised, or they can be let to climb and trail. They'll do either, they don't care. Philodendron tend to climb, so they're good for stakes too. There's some that are more trunk based, so they are more bushy. But a lot of philodendrons like the pink princess and stuff like to climb. And to get big leaves and good variegation, they wouldn't need help with climbing. So just all different stuff to consider. Especially when you bring new plants home, they tend to drop a couple leaves. That's pretty normal. So if you see any yellowing leaves or old leaves, feel free to trim them off. That's not a big deal. So yeah, that's good maintenance stuff to consider when you're buying a new plant, I would say. So I'm going to move on to everybody's least favorite topic. We're going to talk about pests. It's a very important topic though. Everybody deals with them at some point, especially when you have lots of plants. It's kind of inevitable. A lot of people wonder, how did these bugs get in my house? Where do they come from? They come in on you, sorry to say. They'll be on you sometimes and they'll fall off, or they'll jump ship and get on a plant. They come in through the windows when in the summer. They can get a lot of like spider mites, and thrips can get through the screen in a breeze and kind of land on the plant inside. New plants from stores can have pests that you bring into your house. So we'll talk about ways to prevent that in a minute. But they're out to get you. So just be ready for them. A lot of common pests include two-spotted spider mites, mealybugs, aphids, scale, fungus gnats, and thrips. I think all of those are represented up here except for fungus gnats. Do you guys all know what fungus gnats look like? Or fruit flies, kind of, they look like that. But they lay eggs in the soil and then they reproduce in your house and then they fly around and they're really annoying. So we'll talk about those in a second. But these are good examples of what they all look like. You can really see here with the two-spotted spider mite, they get that in webbing. That's a really good indicator that you have spider mites. If you see really thin webs on your plant, sometimes it can be just regular spiders, but thin webs with all these little dots look like they're sliding around like little trams or something really slowly. That's a good indicator you have spider mites. Mealybugs are that little fuzzy white thing. They're really gross. I hate mealybugs. Aphids, same aphids that you get on your roses or something like that. They look the same. They can come in all different colors. You can have green aphids, black aphids, red aphids, but they look like little suckers. They don't really move a lot. Sometimes they'll kind of move their head up and down or whatever, but they don't like crawl very fast or anything. Scale can come in a lot of different flavors. This is a big bumpy scale right here that you can kind of see. There's some that'll be a lot more flat. There's some that'll be more yellow, more brown colored. So they can, but they all get stuck to the plant like a scale would, and they don't move. So that's kind of a good way to kind of tell that they have that you have those. Thrips are awful, and I'm really sorry if anyone's had to deal with thrips ever, but they're the worst because they can jump and they can fly, and they are really hard to see, and you don't really notice them until you have thrip damage, and you're like, oh, what's this? And it's damage from thrips. They reproduce like crazy, and so they're awful to have. And if you see them, I would, go to war very quickly with thrips. And the other ones down here are red spider mites. They're really hard to see. I'm so sorry about this picture, but there's tiny little red dots on this picture. And that is they're very similar to this, but they're a little bit bigger and they're red. They're bright red. So those are all really common pests that everyone here experiences. We have a lot of let's see here. Healthy plants in ideal conditions are less likely to develop pests than stressed plants, which is very true. So if you have a plant that's doing very good, they do have immune systems like we do almost, and they can fight off pests on their own. So if your plants are doing really healthy, it's less likely that you will have pests. It is not guaranteed that you won't have pests, but it's less likely, which is great. Fungus gnats, like a good example of this that my friend actually told me, she said fungus gnats tend to develop in plants that are overwatered, which is very true. Roots are rotting, soil's rotting. It's a great place for them to lay their eggs and for the larvae to feed off the rotting material. So, if you're letting your plants dry out in the wintertime and you have fungus gnats, that's great. That'll help prevent them. It's really hard to completely prevent fungus gnats in the winter here. So we do sell a product called mosquito bits. They're tiny little, I don't think I brought any in here, unfortunately, but we have some in the store. They're tiny little, almost like vermiculite pieces. I don't know if you guys know what that look like, or they just kind of look like little soil things. You put it in their watering can, you let them soak for like 20 minutes, and you go water all your plants with it. It's a beneficial bacteria that actually will go in and kill all the larvae. And so if there's no larvae, there's not going to be any adults, which is great. And so that works really well in the wintertime. If you have any fungus gnats, just to kind of, before you water, mix that in and then go and water your plants with them. And fungus gnats aren't the end of the world. Everyone kind of experiences them, but they don't really hurt your plants as much as some of our other pests would. But they're not fun to have in your house. We do sell a lot of organic, pet safe sprays to deal with a lot of our pests. I brought neem oil in here. That's a great preventative spray. You can spray that on new plants when you take them home as kind of a preventative. It helps keep pests off, and it helps kill or suffocate any new ones that are on there right now. I wouldn't use it to treat a big infestation. Doesn't always work very well. I would use something a little bit stronger. We do sell a product called Captain Jack's for certain bugs that munch or eat the plant in some way. Captain Jack's works really well. For the sucker plants like aphids, they'll suck the juice out, and the thrips will suck the juice out. It doesn't work really for those as much. So for those, there's different sprays that we sell that we can always come talk about if you guys have any questions about that, on how to treat them. I want to talk about a newer way of pest management that's been going around for a lot of people with greenhouses and in the horticulture industry, and that is using bugs that eat the pests to kill the ones that you have in your house. So I have used this. I've experimented with these beneficial insects, what they're called, in my house. They're basically, there's a mite that will eat the spider mites. So if they'll come in like a bag of 10,000 and you can't see them because they're microscopic. You put them on your plants and they crawl out over 2 weeks and they will go and eat anything that they see and then they die. So they're not in your house. They don't do anything else. If you already have bugs in your house, why not add some more? Like, it's kind of where I'm at this point with pests. So there's a couple of different things. There's little mini ladybugs that will eat mealybugs. There are beneficial mites, like I said, that will eat thrip larvae, spider mites, and red spider mites. So that's a really great one to have. They're really good preventative ones too, because I mean, if you have them released every couple of weeks, anything that comes in your house will get eaten. And it's a great way to kind of preemptively manage any pests if you have lots of plants. This might not be, beneficials might not be worth it if you only have a couple plants, but if you have a lot, they work really well. I buy mine from Nature's Good Guys. That's the place that they ship them to you in like 2 days. Shipping's not bad. I've only ever spent like $25 on their website, and I get like 10 bags of these mites, and they will crawl on other plants, and they work really well. So something to consider. I know that's not going to be for everybody, but it works for me and a lot of other growers that you will actually buy plants. Well, we get plants in from growers that use them, so you might even take some home if you buy a plant from us. So let's see if I've got anything else. Oh, for treating plants with oil-based sprays, this is really important. The oil in the spray can stain or damage furniture or clothing. So the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to take it to your bathtub or outside if it allows, if it's cool, if it's nice enough outside. Don't do it in the sun because the oil will magnify the sun and burn your plant. But bathtub is my favorite time in the winter. You take it in there, you just drench the plant from upper side and underside of the leaf until it's dripping. That is a good way to treat something if it's really, really bad. And then after it's dry, just take it out of the bathtub, just rinse your bathtub down. It's organic, so it's not going to hurt you, but it could stain something in your house. So that's a good way to do it and keep all your furniture and stuff nice and safe. So that's really important to consider. You can also, let's see, place plants. You can also put them in a large garbage bag inside your house, kind of, put it down in the garbage bag on the floor and then spray into the garbage bag so that it's all collected in one spot if you don't have a bathtub, because some people don't always have bathtubs.
Or a big cardboard box.
Yes, cardboard box also works. Just be careful because could leak out the sides if there's a hole in it, if it's not a great cardboard box. So if it's an Amazon box, they're not always put together very well. So let's see if we've got any. Oh yeah, and I was going to talk about fungus for you as well. Fungus can be an issue in higher humidity environments for everybody, especially if there's wounds in your plants, if it gets bumped, if they're staying wet for too long. We do sell fungicide, also organic. It's just a copper-based fungicide. You'd spray the plant same way I just explained. Trim off any really infected parts of the plant, and you should be good. I don't really have any pictures of what fungus would look like, but usually what happens is you'll get spots on the leaves that'll be dead in the middle and then yellow on the outside, and then it'll be green like the rest of the plant. Or pieces will be rotting off or something like that. So that's something to consider. Especially in the winter here, it's really hard to avoid sometimes in the winter because it's so dark and wet. Fungus does not thrive in good airflow, bright, warm environments. They like the warm too, but I mean, cold is also fine for fungus. So be considerate of that. And the last thing that I want to go over with you guys today is when you take a new plant home, what should you do with it? Let's see here, what's next? Oh yeah, I've got a little timeline for you. So before your plant gets to here, it is in a big, large greenhouse that's heated and temperature controlled. It's very fancy usually. And it starts out really small, and they will outplant it and grow it out in that greenhouse until it is picked up and shipped in a big, large truck, and it'll be dropped off here. They're not very nice to plants and shipping. So sometimes mechanical damage can happen, especially with more delicate plants. This is a great example right here. You can see there's a scar and the leaf is broken. It's not a danger to the plant, it's just a little unsightly. So as you take it home and it starts to grow out of that, those leaves will go away and it'll be fine. It's not anything that's going to spread or hurt your plant. But they get bumped around in those trucks. They get thrown and picked up and pushed around in carts and bumped into each other. Yeah,
cut off those types of, that's sort of damage to let the energy focus to the rest of the plant?
I would say if you only have a couple nice leaves, it's better to keep damaged leaves that aren't rotting or something. Like that is fine. Like I would leave that on there because it's going to help your plant grow out of it a lot faster. Because the plant, that part of the plant is still going to be photosynthesizing and providing energy to the rest of the plant. So if it's really damaged or it's rotting or something, then you can cut it off. But if it's just a couple little mechanical things, I would leave it probably until it grows out of until it has enough leaves, and then you can cut it off. It's still there and it's kind of ugly. So that's usually what I do. I just wait a little bit longer because it will still provide energy to the plant. So yeah. Let's see here. The plants, like I said, they go through a lot to get here. We try our best to take care of them. We do trim up some really bad leaves for you. We'll check for pests when they come in. If they have pests, we send them back. And so then we will have them put out in the display for you. We've got a big cabinet out there full of plants now. So you can look in there for them, but we also have some just out in the store. It's a great way to kind of help you pick stuff out. If you have any questions, we're always here to answer them when you're shopping. So let's see, once you pick out your plant and you take it home, you got to be really careful, especially in the winter or in the summer, to not leave it in your car for very long because the car can get really cold or really hot really fast. And once you get outside those temperature ranges that we talked about, it can cause leaf damage, root damage. So if you want to take a new plant home, ideally this would be your last stop. If it's not, that's okay, as long as it's, quick stops, or you can always buy it. We'll hold it for you for a day and you can come pick it up later, whenever it's convenient for you. So that's something that you can do as well. But I mean, if it's mild outside, it's not really a huge deal. But again, like I said, getting bumped around, it's going to cause a little bit more damage too. So it's great. It's great for plants if you can just take them home immediately after buying them. I would also recommend maybe keeping them in isolation for a week, away from the rest of your plants, just in case there's any bugs or hitchhikers on them. You can kind of see it happen before they infect your other plants. You can also get like neem oil, like I said, and do a preventative treatment, kill anything that's on there that you can't see, and then put them out. I don't always do this myself because I am lazy, like I said. And so it's not always what I do, but I will tell you that because it can be helpful and it can prevent pests from entering your collection at home. So that is a good way to do that. And I think, oh yeah, and another good thing too, you should really let your plant acclimate to its new environment before you try and repot it. Like I said, there are unique situations where the soil is bad, there's rotting roots, there could be other issues going on, so where repotting it would be better. But I mean, if the soil is fine and the plant is fine, I would suggest waiting at least 2 weeks before you repot it, just so that it can adjust to its new environment at your house. And then letting it, then you can kind of repot it if it needs it. But waiting is really helpful in getting those plants to establish in your home. So I think that's all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm here to answer any questions you might have. If you guys want to buy some of our plants that we have in here, I just ask that you pick them out, bring them to me, and I will put them in the store for you because we just don't want them to go out in the parking lot. So just let me know and I will put your name on it and put it up at the register for you. And like I said, you guys have that coupon, so I hope you guys can use that today. And yeah, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.